Okay, is everyone ready? Perfect. My name is Katie Doran. I'll be the first speaker from the affirmation representing Menlo-Atherton. My time will begin now. Today, Cheryl and I strongly affirm the resolution resolved. The United States federal government should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products. First, let's go into some background information. Firstly, what's provided by the topic committee at the tournament: modern products from construction to farming equipment to cars to iPhones, a variety of different technologies all require software and complex electromechanical systems. Firms consider these to be proprietary in the status quo and often only provide information that enables servicing and repair to authorized dealers, which makes it very difficult for other people and organizations to get information as for how to repair these items. Let's look at some background as for current legal precedent around this issue. The first point here is that in July of 2021, President Joe Biden already signed an executive order which asked the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, to create rules that would force tech companies to let consumers repair their own devices or to use a technician of their choice instead of having to use authorized repair technicians. The FTC is currently constructing those rules, but there's no guarantee that they'll be passed. The president also wants to require large manufacturers like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, etc., to make available to everyone their repair manuals, tools, components, and parts. Similar bills have also already been introduced in the Senate and the House, and there's been bipartisan support so far. The second point under the background is that the Federal Trade Commission has also unanimously voted to ramp up law enforcement against repair restrictions that prevent small businesses, workers, consumers, and even government entities from fixing their own products. So there's definitely a lot of political support for this in the status quo. Thirdly, and finally, since Biden's executive order, both Microsoft and Apple have since announced plans to make repair parts and manuals more accessible, as have other companies, which indicates company willingness to comply with these kinds of policies. Because of the word should in today's resolution, we define this as a policy round, and thus a round that should be weighed on net benefits. That is to say, whichever team creates the greatest amount of good should be the one to win the round. Our plan is that the resolution: the United States federal government should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products over the next 10 years. But let's break that down a little bit more as for how exactly that would work. First, on the solvency. The first point here is that while we set the time frame to over the next 10 years, there will be different time frames based on your industry. Certain industries will require longer in order to create security measures and to make sure that the information that they're releasing, their products, are still going to be secure despite the fact that they're releasing that information. For example, things like Tesla or other car companies would need to protect against cybersecurity and thus would need up to the 10-year time period. However, other industries, depending on what products they're producing, will have shorter time periods and requirements placed on them under our plan text. We set the time frame as 10 years because that's the longest that would be afforded, but it all depends on your industry. Now, the second point under solvency is that this is also going to be similar to bills that are currently introduced in the Senate and the House, so we can look to those kinds of precedents. Thirdly, there's also similar precedent in certain states, such as California, where I am. There's a bill in California with bipartisan majority support for a, quote, right to repair law, in which companies are already preparing for. There's already within California 75% support for the right to repair, including among both Democrats and Republicans and other parties alike. Moreover, fourthly and finally, there will be exceptions based for certain products. For example, there are some products that are just really hard to repair, and there's not really a whole lot that a company can do to fix that. For example, Apple's AirPod, which are their wireless earbuds, are impressively tiny, which is part of their allure, but it's also part of the reason why they're so hard to repair. These kinds of products would be examples of exemptions, because if a given company is unable to repair their own product, we can't expect them to release information to other parties that would allow them to repair those products if they're unable to do so themselves. Okay, that brings us to our first advantage, which is that of the environment. The first point under the uniqueness, or what's happening in the status quo, is that currently limiting the ability to repair a broken device has destroyed independent repair shops and has encouraged consumers to dispose of a machine or a piece of technology, such as a phone, instead of fixing it. The A sub point here is that Americans, for example, throw away almost 500,000 or 416,000 cell phones every single day, which adds up to more than 150 million phones trashed in a single year. For reference, in California, that's almost 50,000 phones thrown away every day. Now, that's because it's oftentimes very difficult or expensive for individuals to get their phone fixed or repaired, and so oftentimes they assume that they should just toss it away or buy a new phone instead. Secondly, when it comes to other industries beyond just things like personal technology, if we look to the farming industry, for example, which is also referenced in the topic, well-made tractors can easily last over 15 years if you get it from a credible creator or a credible manufacturer. However, the average lifespan of these tractors is at only 7 to 8 years because they are often not repaired, and when there's some sort of malfunction, they often end up trashed as people or farmers end up buying new technology instead of fixing the technology that they currently have. So let's look at the links, or how we're going to resolve the wastefulness of the status quo. The first point here is that people will be able to get their items repaired more easily instead of tossing it away, because there will be more independent repairers and authorized repairers who can actually repair your products, instead of only a handful, as there are in the status quo, of people who are given this confidential information from these companies. Right to repair is But secondly, right to repair is good for the environment because it reduces how many greenhouse gases are released, as many of these emissions are created during the manufacturing process. Repairing your possessions not only cuts down on waste because you're not sending these products to landfills, but also cuts down on the greenhouse gases and the other pollutants that are released when those products are being manufactured. So let's look at the impacts. The first impact is that of the environment in terms of less wastefulness of products as products are repaired instead of tossed. Again, not only is that in terms of these landfills, but also in terms of the carbon emissions that are created from electrical waste itself or from the process of manufacturing these products. This is especially important because dumps and landmines are often located in marginalized communities and can serve as reasons why marginalized communities are unable to develop further or can't attract a whole lot of investment. If we're able to decrease the size of these landfills by attacking this aspect of American consumerism, we'll make environments more livable, as well as better for the environment, as well as boosting up these marginalized communities. But moreover, secondly, tossing away phones and other electronics can and have caused fires. For example, when thrown into the trash or even into the recycling bin, phones can cause fires. And in California, within the last year, 65% of fires at waste facilities in California have begun with lithium-ion batteries that were found within personal electronics such as iPhones. If we'll be able to decrease this risk if less of these iPhones are ending up in the trash. Okay, our second contention is that of expenses to the consumer. Let's first look at the uniqueness. The first point, again, repairing technology is expensive right now because you have to get authorized people to do it. Secondly, manufacturers also use a variety of methods, such as using adhesives that make parts difficult to replace, limiting the availability of parts and tools, or making a diagnostic software unavailable, and that has made consumer products intentionally harder to fix and maintain, something that right to repair laws would prevent from happening. Apple, for example, won't sell you or an independent repair shop its custom tools with the original replacement parts or the diagnostic software that the Apple Store uses and authorized service providers use, which limits your repair options dramatically. And that's only one example. So let's look at the links or how we're able to resolve that. First, the right to repair makes it easier for people to get their items repaired so that they don't have to buy new. That's because there's going to be more people who are capable of doing these repairs in the first place because you don't have to go to only a handful of authorized repairers. But secondly, it also makes it cheaper to repair things as corporations will no longer hold a monopoly over this kind of repair industry and as that information is more widely accessible. California, for example, under a similar bill, analysts have expected that opting for repair over replacement due to this right to repair law could save Californian families collectively $4.3 billion every year, or an average of $330 per family. Thus, the impacts were going to be able to improve the cost of living of consumers, especially as many Americans can't afford financial emergencies, and oftentimes this technology is important to your everyday life or to your education. For these reasons, it's important that consumers have the right to repair.
Okay, I have three arguments I'm going to get through for the neg side, and then I'll move on to AF in the order it was read. Okay. Everyone's ready. My time starts now. I strongly negate the resolution. The United States federal government should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products. Our counterplan is going to be the United States federal government should require businesses to abandon planned obsolescence models of product development. Solvency. The reason why products like Apple phones break easily is because it's profitable for Apple to make easily breakable products so that individuals are forced to buy more products. Eliminating planned obsolescence models of product development removes the root cause for products incessantly breaking in the first place. And this is really key here because kind of it solves for the internal link for all the arguments that the affirmation brings up. And even if you have tools or provide information for how to repair these products, it's not solving the issue of why they need to be repaired in the first place, which we are able to do. Two, viable product longevity is key for investor confidence because it improves consumer confidence in the actual product because it's able to last for a longer time, which leads to a better brand image and more investments overall. Competition, we compete through net benefits, and I'll get into our disads and explain why we should do this, why you should only be doing the counter plan here. Our first disad is going to be that of
Can we get the text?
Yeah, Kathy, can you send in the chat? Our first decide is going to be that of cybersecurity uniqueness one. Cybersecurity is good right now in the status quo. An executive order passed in May of 2021 bolstered U.S. cybersecurity, which mandated that the federal government advance towards zero trust architecture, accelerated movement to secure cloud services, including software as a service, infrastructure as a service, etc., which centralizes and streamlines access to cybersecurity data to drive analytics for identifying and managing cybersecurity risks, and invest in both technology and personnel. These measures fixed a good portion of current lapses in U.S. cybersecurity, but we see that we're still at risk here. Biden has also showed great vested interest in improving U.S. cybersecurity, and we're seeing an upward trend towards this. Links. So this is why the plan would reverse this. Technical details released has led to Russia gaining more intel. The products outlined by the resolution also includes military technology like radios, radars, and other important computer technology. These are all produced by private companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, etc. The res mandates that the technical details of these are released, which allows for them to be reproduced or or for current devices to be hacked more easily because they have intel on how exactly the products are working. And we've actually seen this happen in the past. Nokia reportedly helped the FSB spy on customers of Russia's largest telecoms provider when they released technical details of their products. So we see here that there's past precedent for when companies are releasing information about their products, that's actually directly leading to Russia being able to crack down on the U.S. cybersecurity more. The impacts of this one is Russian hegemony. This is especially damning given Russia's Russian invasion of Ukraine. Any access to customer data or ability to reproduce military technology is key, given that sanctions have crippled Russia's current ability to gain access to military technology, and this would overall lead to more cyber warfare, along with Russia gaining more power in this sphere of influence. And two, it's privacy, giving authoritarian regimes the ability to access customer data, which we saw with Nokia, crushes resistance movements, and it furthers authoritarianism and decreases the quality of life for millions of individuals. Our second disadvantage is going to be that of investor confidence. Our first uniqueness point is that investor confidence is high in the status quo. Despite the current Ukrainian crisis, the tech market has high investor confidence. Levels remain steady now after dropping early March following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Numbers are high, but it's also subject to change. Two, consumer confidence is high. A survey of consumer confidence rose to 107.2 in March, according to the Market Watch, an increase for the first time in 2022. But Americans are still uneasy about high inflation and the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine. Links one. No, there's no guarantee that safety measures will be accurately followed if devices are fixed by individuals less familiar with the product than the dealer that actually produced the product. Digging into your tech devices yourself can be dangerous as they house combustible materials and sharp metal parts. Any sort of serious mishandling can result in you requiring urgent care. Plus, when user fixes go wrong and it hurts the device owner, and it can deeply impact a company's image as their products are then seen as a hazard, similar to what happened with the exploding Samsung Galaxy Note 7. This ultimately, this damage is what's harming investor confidence because it's ruining the brand image and also like harming consumers that think that they can fix these like fancy iPhones when they don't have the tools to do so. Uh, Two is the product repair monopoly. Investors think that companies won't be able to make as much profit. For example, Apple makes a lot of money by basically having a monopoly on Apple product repair, which means that investors will anticipate a loss of revenue and pull out. So this is really key here because when we see that investors are pulling out, that's going to be affecting the economy and cost of these products overall. Three is intellectual property. Investors will be rightfully concerned that the resolution would involve revealing company intellectual property, which would lead to knockoffs because now everybody knows how to make them. This tanks investor confidence overall in these companies. Now, the impacts of this is one that is key for the economy. We see that the tech industry specifically is really important for keeping Ukraine's economy afloat right now because they had such a growth in the tech industry there. And so it's overall not only important for the US economy, but it's also helping. It's helping industries over the world, and overall, like with less investor confidence, like the consumer product is going to go down, which means that we're overall going to have a decreased quality of life, and like more poverty as a result of the affirmations plan. And because like investor confidence leads to like products being like more and more expensive, that means that these products are going to be a lot less accessible to consumers, which means that more low income individuals will not be able to afford some of these products, which ultimately increases inequality and leads to more structural violence. So that is what the plan is doing. Now let's move on to the affirmation side of the flow. So my first response here is basically that there's like a huge solvency deficit because even if you are releasing this information about how to repair, there's actually like specific hardware that you need to buy and tools that require licensing from Apple or like these tech companies anyway to be able to solve. While old tech products were fixable with standard tools that anyone could buy at a local hardware store, modern tech products are smaller and more nuanced in comparison. They often require special tools that are not readily available to everyone and can even require licensing to use. So we see that even if like the information to how to repair these products are released, they're not going to have the tools necessary. And even if they do, these small like repair stores and independent ones that the affirmation is talking about are not going to be able to afford these special tools. And if they are able to do it, they're going to have to make the repairs super expensive. So even though like Apple is a monopoly, they ultimately like it's cheaper because they get to reuse these tools, and because they're like such a huge company, they are able to afford these and actually provide like cheaper repairs because of this. And it's just simply like not like there's no solvency here because people won't be able to actually fix the issue here, and independent repairs aren't going to be able to do this. Overall in their environment, and their uniqueness completely overwhelms the link here. There's wasteful companies all across the globe, and specifically like again, it takes one individual accidentally blowing up their phone to get that product pulled from the market, which means that for every version of the product has to be tossed, which is significantly worse for waste because this is happening often when people are messing up with their phones or like going in. If an independent person that doesn't understand it as well as like an Apple technician messes with it and they have to pull everything out, that's going to be lead to more waste. And also making it more easily repairable would even if we argued that like these people would be able to repair these products, ultimately like these tech companies would have to like largely like change the way their products work in order to make it possible for independent people outside of Apple to actually fix these. And what they have to do is they have to decrease efficiency for accommodating modulation and repairability. And OEMs can't really afford to do that amid fierce competition where their products are constantly being compared with others. This is the reason why products are so tiny, tech products. It's because they aren't caring as much about like making it accessible to repair. And what happens is people and like investors and everyone is just going to simply move to like international companies that are even worse for the environment. That's that are like outside the U.S. that are like in China, etc., in places where they don't have as many like laws in place for this, because the like repair module would lead to like the competition moving away from the US. That's going to be worse overall for both the economy and the environment. For those reasons, I urge negation ballot. Thank you.
All right, the order is going to be the neg case in the order of the counterplan, investor confidence, actually counterplan, yeah, investor confidence, safety and security, safety or cybersecurity, and then case. Counterplan, investor confidence, cybersecurity, case. Okay. There is a major problem in the status quo with people having to replenish their cell phones like every single year, every 2 years, and that's extremely unaffordable for most American families. Therefore, like, and not only with phones, but also with like tractors and other technological devices, which require like niche knowledge in the status quo. Therefore, the only way to solve this is through the right to repair laws. And I'll talk about why their counterplan is completely ineffective at doing this. So first, their argument was on planned obsolescence. I have a few arguments and responses. First is that planned obsolescence isn't necessarily a bad thing, nor is it something that is able to be changed. It's kind of inevitable in the status quo because cell phones don't last for 20 years. Like cell phones don't last for 20 years because of the battery life of the lithium ion battery. If they wanted to, cell phone manufacturers can make phones more durable than they currently are. But that's not necessarily bad planned obsolescence because it's something called value engineering. Because if a useful life of a cell phone is limited to only a few years due to the rapid rate of technological improvement in the field, that means it'd be wasteful to build a cell phone with a physical lifespan much longer than its useful life. For example, it's better for these companies to use like more inexpensive plastic parts than, for example, making a phone out of titanium. Because again, the cell phone itself and the software is only going to last like so long. So like oftentimes the planned obsolescence isn't like necessary, like sure it's made out of a cheaper products, but that's just to reduce the cost for these people. That's why this is like not necessarily a good thing because they would just increase the prices. But also secondly is that plain obsolescence is something that you really can't prove, right? Phone companies, these tractor companies can always say, oh, there's some sort of like function, there's some sort of function of this like planned obsolescence, which is the reason we have it. So it's not necessarily intentional. It's not like a ploy for greater profit. So it's completely unenforceable. But the third argument is the permutation. Not only will we reduce this, like the permutation would actually be even more net beneficial because we reduce the need for people to repair in the first place, which can counteract a lot of their disadvantages. But either way, I'll talk about why they're like, we already tell you that their counterplan is not net beneficial. And yeah, they're not mutually exclusive. So perm. On the disadvantage on investor confidence, the counterplan entirely links to this because if companies are selling less phones, then obviously investors are going to pull out their investment and that would just tank the stock market. So they literally double link into this and that's something that they completely ignore. But also on the uniqueness, is entirely non-unique. He tells you in the background that the Biden has already signed an executive order earlier, like in 2021, asking the FTC to create rules to force tech companies to implement these right to repair laws. Moreover, the FTC has actually voted unanimously 5-0 for these right to repair laws. So it's something that's very eminent, obviously, but like they won't necessarily have like Congress's support. So obviously there's a lot of signaling that this might happen. So companies are already preparing for it. But also moreover is that Yeah, so, like, these companies are already preparing for this. Investor confidence has not tanked. Also, the economy is recovering, as they said. So, if this was true, the links would have already been triggered. But also on the links, the FTs. So, first of all, they talk about how it's combustible material, and I have a few responses to how safety is not an issue for these companies. The first one is that right to repair anything. If anything, turn. It's actually safer to have right to repair laws. For example, the John Deere tractors, which is what like most farmers use, have to be updated by only licensed technicians. But farmers who can't afford to wait resort to hacking their tractors with black market firmware, and which is a far less safe option than using diagnostic tools that the John Deere company would release itself. So that's, if anything, even less safe. That's a turn. But also, secondly, is that you can look to not just tractors, but also just like other phones and things that individuals would have. There's if you just like search on AliExpress or Banggood, you would see these retail platforms all have a host of spare parts available for phones, tablets, and everything else. But it's obviously not as safe as something that Apple would release, and that could lead to the same harms that they talk about. We tell you that a bunch of Americans don't have disposable income to be buying new Apple phones, which is kind of like the standard that is like in America, so people are compelled to buy that, or like literally any phone. So it's very likely that these people are buying off it, given that there's a huge supply and there's also a huge demand. So, but also, moreover, they talk this on the second. Okay, also, the raw which is the Roberts Act, was this is the third response in Massachusetts. Basically, they implemented right to repair for cars and actually had an outsized impact. After it was put in place, major car manufacturers agreed to share repair information with independent mechanics or across the country. So obviously that's not for individuals, but we'll see like this didn't lead to any like for safety concerns, and it has happened like on its own. And also like companies would obviously adapt to this because they don't want their reputation to be ruined. But also on IP on IP theft, this is, like, just not going to happen. Like, the FTC has already recommended it. Like, there's no like, basically, the consensus is that this would not hurt IP because it's, like, all about software, right? It's not the material design. If it was that easy, just by, like, giving a repair manual, somehow you're able to just collapse the entire business of Apple or these, like or Google, that would have already happened. Obviously, these products were not that means that the products were not made to be good enough, so this is not a threat whatsoever, not even just a severe threat, it's not a threat whatsoever to IP, and it's just about, like you can, like, take apart a phone anyway, right? Like, a repair manual is not gonna help you, well, okay, so basically, yeah, that's, like, a bunch of responses to that, but on cybersecurity, I have a few responses that we anticipated. First of all is that there's no such thing as security through obscurity. A robust system would still be secure even if people know how it works. Releasing repair manuals and spare parts shouldn't undermine an already sound smartphone. Obviously, this is on the links, by the way. In most cases, manufacturers of devices have not disclosed technical information or diagnostic codes that would allow cyber criminals to cause mischief. Today's home electronics are shipped to customers with software vulnerabilities, such as common administrative password that the user is unable to change on their own, or poorly implemented software. Meaning that products get hacked, it mostly happen without the most likely happen without the attacker having any proprietary knowledge provided by the vendor, right? That just doesn't make sense. Also, secondly, is that it's on the uniqueness. It's entirely not unique. Malicious networks composed of hacked home routers, webcams, and other devices are like can be linked to forms of vast global networks that become platforms to launch a range of malicious activities. It's already having status code. Like there's millions of cyber attacks, and like there's no right to repair laws in the United States. And also on Nokia, I have a few responses. First of all, Nokia is like this is a really bad example because no one uses like Nokias anymore. But also, secondly, is that there are no right to repair laws in the EU or US, meaning likely Nokia. If there was something different with this case, it was not necessarily like right to repair, giving people a manual. But also, and I don't even think they like gave people manuals how to fix their phones. But also, it's not unique. There's no like the Soviet Union doesn't exist because like again because of Nokia. But on our contentions, okay, so basically, now that we've understood that their counterplan has no solvency, you can extend the environmental impact. But a very key point you should extend is that of fires. When people are throwing away their phones constantly, that leads to like a lot of lithium ion batteries in the same place in these waste disposals, and when they're together, they create fires, which is why 65% of waste facility fires happen in California, which is obviously a real big problem that our state is dealing with. So this is a huge safety issue, like if we're going to be talking about safety, but also we talk about carbon emissions and energy production, that there's a huge carbon cost with that, considering that basically all American families have like phones, like even if they don't have internet, like most Americans have phones, and likely it's more than just one individual because like schools often assume that students have them, etc. Like that's a huge environmental cost, but also the expenses to the consumer. We tell you that like most Americans don't even have 1,000, like 56% of Americans don't even have $1,000 like to spare. So phones are far more than that. And this would save California families alone $4.3 billion. And this would especially help them in their jobs because most jobs require cell phones in order to contact your boss, etc. We don't need people throwing out their phones every year. For this reason, it's a affirmation ballot.
Cool. So I'm going to go neg case in order. So counterplan, counterplan, cybersecurity, investor confidence, and then the app case in the order that it was read. All right. If everyone's ready, my time begins now. First off, on the counterplan, they tell you that planned obsolescence is not bad or changeable. Look to the fact that Apple literally tanks battery performance for every old model of their phone after new models come out. This is not a simple issue of using a cheaper plastic to build your phone. It's the fact that Apple tanks its own battery performance to make it so that individuals buy new phones. So ultimately, my opponents misunderstand what planned obsolescence is. It's not the idea that they don't build their phones to last 20 years, because that's not it being planned to purposely be obsolete. Planned obsolescence is when Apple specifically plans to make their phones unusable after a certain amount of years on purpose. So yeah, it like using cheaper things is just like straight up economics that isn't bad or changeable, but like having Apple do these things on purpose is changeable and is bad. Also, if cell phones aren't supposed to last that long, then it seems that repairs can only go so long. Like if you're telling us that cell phones don't last 20 years, that software doesn't last that long and isn't going to last, the repair is going to get maybe 5 years on your phone, and then you're still going to have to throw that phone away, which means that you're fundamentally non-solvent for the entire like environmental issue, at the point where you're not preventing phones from being thrown away at all. You're just like extending the amount of years that a person can use it by like 1 or 2 before it gets thrown away. But at the end of the day, in terms of like fires and toxic waste, et cetera, you're still going to have millions of phones being thrown away every year, which is still going to lead to those issues. The only way to actually solve this is to make it so that Apple phones are not literally designed to be unusable after 5 or 6 years because the battery doesn't work anymore. And they say that you can't ensure taking it away. Planned obsolescence is literally written into like how Apple builds their phones. So if like, since all that information is public and the government can like mandates that you can't have, like, this is public knowledge that ultimately Apple does this. If the government passes a law to make that impossible, like, it's not like this is a secret covert thing that companies are doing. If it's like out in the open, then you can ensure that you can like limit that. Then you talk about the permutation. First of all, we're competitive on net benefits. Like they talk about, we talk about military tech and how ultimately planned obsolescence is going to prevent that from being shared, because these are going to last longer and you're not going to have to use these repairs. So ultimately on net benefits, because we don't lead to like the leakage of IP, and I'll get onto that later, you're going to want to prefer this to the world of the affirmative. Yeah, moving on to the negative case. First off, on cybersecurity, they tell you the counterplan links, but this is not true. Or that's later on. They tell you that knowing how it works won't undermine these examples. So extend Nokia here. They tell you this is a bad example because no one uses Nokias. Just because no one uses Nokias now doesn't mean that sharing company information doesn't lead to FSB spying. Also, this wasn't in regards to Nokia phones. It was in regards to Nokia, the telecom provider, which like was an internet provider for individuals. So like releasing that code, releasing how that works, which would be like, say someone wants to fix their own code, if there's like a bug or something, you're going to have to do that. So information was still released on how the phones worked. So ultimately, we're not just looking at products here. We're looking at the way things are coded if individuals want to fix that. And releasing that kind of information can lead to really disastrous consequences for IP theft and for spying, which we're seeing in the status quo. They're saying we're not leaking like diagnostic codes. Like, sure, they didn't leak diagnostic codes in the Nokia example, and it still led to pretty catastrophic consequences for a lot of individuals. So you're going to extend the fact that even the like minor chance that Russia gets more intel is pretty damning here, given that they're killing like indiscriminate amounts of people in Ukraine right now. Like any chance that Russia would get access to like civilian data because of leaked leaked code or leaked like handbooks or whatever is going to overwhelm like the nominal difference between phones being thrown away right now or being thrown away in 2 years. So you're going to be weighing magnitude over probability here, because it's like irreversible if individuals die, whereas you can fix up pollution. On the investor confidence, if you look at the counterplan links, this isn't true. Investor confidence is way more about IP than it is about of the counterplan. The biggest reasons why investors lose confidence is because of the lack of secrecy around the products anymore. Even if you argue there isn't actually any loss to IP, the threat that sharing company information is going to do that is going to lead to a loss in investor confidence. They tell you that it would have happened already because like the FTC, whatever, like the intellectual property hasn't been given out yet. This hasn't passed yet. Like the murmurs that this bill might be passed isn't what triggers the intellectual property theft. It's the fact that if someone blows up their phone, like when they're trying to fix it, that is ultimately going to lead to a loss of investor confidence. We're projecting for the future here. The IP hasn't been given out yet. And they talk about John Deere tractors and individuals hacking them. The reason why they do this is because they take forever to fix, just like Apple phones need specific supplies to be fixed. You're ultimately proving why individuals, even if given instructions, will not be able to fix their stuff because it's going to cost money to like get a repair manual and get what you need. I'll take it at the end of this if I have time. So ultimately, we talk a lot about how like you need licensed tools to fix your stuff. The main reason why John Deere, like farmers are not able to do this right now is because it's very expensive to do, like the way that John Deere wants you to do it. And so ultimately, like that just proves that your plan is completely non-solvent. Also, our counter plan solves for this. It makes so these tractors don't break as often. And there's been no like recorded deaths as for individuals like hacking their John Deere tractors. So we're not seeing like any sort of safety issues with this. And they tell you that companies would adapt. This was a literal link that my partner reads you, that it would take money if individuals had to make it so that like some random individual can fix a phone if they want to. Like that's going to take insane amounts of money for companies to perform. And that's ultimately going to like lead to this decreased investor confidence that we're talking about. Also, like about this like issue about it being unsafe, it doesn't matter if you don't, a single instance of something unsafe happening leads to things getting pulled off shelves, like with Samsung. Like the Samsung 7 doesn't exist anymore. So ultimately, that's going to be pretty damning for a company, and you're opening up the doors for individuals, like for the company to be sued because they gave individuals instructions to actually fix it. Whereas with the John Deere example, like the company can't be held liable for that because individuals are choosing to hack into these devices. But if you're giving people a like front door to walk in and fix your things and it explodes, that's really, really bad for the company. They tell you that like there's the Roberts Act and the right to repair, and we're already sharing information. So this is a double bind here. If it's already authorized and they already have that information, either you're the SQO and individuals are already able to fix their devices, or it actually does involve IP theft and does involve more like clearing of other information. And so you're still going to link into what we're saying here. They tell you IP theft wouldn't happen. Again, extend Nokia, like sharing code and sharing like sensitive details about a product so that people know more about it, like is easily hackable by individuals, especially if you're sharing stuff from like military equipment, like military radios. And they neglect to consider the fact like it wasn't just IP theft, it's also the fact that individuals can like replicate those devices. So if you're sharing like the inner workings of how a device works, like you can't just be naive here. Like you're not just sharing like, oh, press a button and you're going to fix it here. Like so that they're not liable for individuals breaking their stuff, you're going to have to share some pretty sensitive details about how these things work, which allows for replication, which is really, really bad again for the whole Russia situation. On to the affirmative. So they talk a lot about how like how there's environmental consequences to things being thrown away. I've touched on this already. You're really not solving for this. And also like the uniqueness completely overwhelms the status quo here. You're going to be like, you're seeing a lot of pollution anyways. You're really not solving anything by making it so that a couple years down the road, things are thrown away. If they're authorized, they already have access to this information ultimately. So uniqueness completely overwhelms the link. Individuals can, yeah, also you're going to be extending our solvency deficit here. Companies could take it a step further and make it intentionally difficult for individuals to fix their products. And the most notable example of this, again, is Apple using proprietary screws in iPhones that repair shops, I have like 30 seconds left to know, cannot pry the devices open. They need to be Apple certified to receive the specialized tool. So you're literally seeing Apple making it intentionally difficult for repair shops to pry their devices open, which is exactly what the counterplan solves and what the AF fails to do. So at the point where they fundamentally don't respond to any of our solvency deficits here about how individuals cannot fix their stuff, you're going to be buying that the neg risks outweigh the AF potential helps. That's a word. For these reasons, I urge a strong vote for the negative side of this debate.
Okay. I would suggest flowing all of this on a separate sheet of paper since I'm not going to be directly responding to specific ads or disads. But I'll do voters weighing plan, counterplan comparison. Okay. Everyone's ready. My time starts now. I strongly negate the resolution. The USFG should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products. We have three key voters here as to why you should give the ballot to the negation side. One is that there's a huge solvency deficit that the MG fails to respond to. People literally don't have the tools to fix the device. Even if they are given the information as to how to repair these, they require special licenses that they don't have access to. This clearly shows that even if they have that information, they won't be able to repair these devices. Don't let the affirmation get up and tell you otherwise. They literally won't be able to solve any of this and like repair these products that they say they do. Even if you grant them that they have the tools and that they would be able to fix it, these tech companies would have to be super inefficient to make it accessible for repairs. And which would mean that like you're going to have like huge economic repercussions because they simply would not make enough money. They would largely like be super inefficient and be slower overall, which, and if your phone is slower and if your phone is overall inefficient because it has to be easier for repair, that's going to incentivize people to buy newer and more phones, which ultimately leads to the environmental cycle that the affirmation talks about. There's no way to get out of this. Two, our second voter is the just simply the IP link. This is a huge thing that they concede here, and it's like a unique reason why the counter plan functions competitively. It's really important here that investors want to see that the product that they're investing in is unique. When this is taken away, there's no reason for them to go into some industry that's simply going to like be battled out for. Sorry, is like someone. Sorry, pause time.
What's happening? Neha, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I didn't know if there was like beeping noises, and I didn't know if it was at my house or.
Sorry, I think it might have been my microphone was like on for a few seconds, but I turned it off.
Okay. Sounds good. I was just making sure. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. Resuming time now. This is really key here. If they're not investing, that means that this is like also the internal link to both of their advantages here, this simple IP link. Because if you don't have investors investing, that's obviously going to make it harder for the consumers. And because if these companies don't have money, that means that they're not going to be environmentally conscious. This impact from this direct link is going to be solving back for the affirmations impacts. Third, individual repair stores are most likely already authorized by the company and have the information necessary to repair. It's not that many people that the affirmations plan is supposedly helping, aside from consumers that really want to go try to fix their iPhones, which ultimately obviously leads to more risks overall. Now let's talk about weighing. So basically on the affirmation side here, that they have the environment and how they're going to reduce the number of phones that go into the landfill, which is just not true because again, the solvency deficit, and also it's a very small impact. And again, like they can see that their uniqueness largely overwhelms the link and they don't solve at all, which is a really huge issue here because if climate change is inevitable and they can't really solve it, then like you should prefer solving back for the impacts that we talk about, especially like Russia war and like that escalating even more than it already has and spying on civilians. That is like our cybersecurity point is like a much bigger issue because it's something that we can actually solve in the status quo. We saw that like the Nokia example, it directly led to like Russians being able to use that information to spy. It's something that we can solve for, and it's also obviously like a really huge impact because there's a lot of death involved in this. And overall, we're going to be weighing this magnitude over probability because death is irreversible. And again, like for the economy, it's very clear here that the key to the economy is investor confidence. I think both teams agree on this. And if we're the only ones that are solving for investor confidence because of this specific IP, like the IP thing that we brought up, that means that we're the only ones that are going to be accessing the impacts to the economy. And again, magnitude over probability calculations are often wrong. And either way, we're overall more probable because we're more probable to solve back for this like Russian intel and like this overall like IP risk that and like investor confidence risk because it's more likely to happen and there's very less probability of being able to solve back for the environment. And also we control the internal link to this. Now let's just compare quickly the plan versus the counter plan. Overall, in the counter plan, don't buy the perm. IP theft is very important in this quo. Even if there's a small risk of that or Russia being able to gain intel, that those impacts are going to outweigh, and it should only be this, and we should outweigh on or like compete on net benefits. Again, on the plan, like it's simply like not feasible to like let consumers try to fix their own devices, and it has nominal environmental impacts, and they overall, because they can see that the uniqueness overwhelms the link, they really should not have access to any of those impacts. For those reasons, I urge a negative ballot. Thank you.
Okay. Again, I'm Katie Dorn, first and last speaker for the affirmation team. This speech is just going to be an overview. I'll go briefly on the app case, then. No, actually, I'll do counterplan, app case, then disadvantages in the order of cybersecurity to investor confidence. So overview, counterplan, app case, disad 1, disad 2. The permutation is able to effectively solve for the inaccessibility of technological repairs in the status quo, while also avoiding all these harms of cybersecurity and the loss of investor confidence, given that these policies have already been announced in the status quo and have not triggered this collapse. And on top of that, companies have policies in place to prevent these losses of cybersecurity, an issue that is already prevalent in the status quo, but isn't going to get any worse with our plan. Let's talk more directly about the counterplan. The first thing I want to extend here is the permutation. They say that their counterplan is only competitive through net benefits, which indicates that they're not mutually exclusive, which means that you can do both. This means that if we prove to you that cybersecurity and a loss of investor confidence is not an issue with our plan, there's no reason to vote for the counterplan. Okay, going on to the specific arguments for the counterplan. The first thing I want you to extend is that planned obsolescence is going to a practice similar to planned obsolescence is always going to inevitably happen because technology is always going to inevitably deteriorate. Now, they try to tell you that Apple is intentionally tanking their battery performance, and there are ways that planned obsolescence happens on purpose in a planned manner. But even if that were the case, planned obsolescence does not resolve for all of those repair needs, because lithium-ion batteries, even if Apple wasn't intentionally taking their performance, are eventually going to deteriorate. It's not just a regard of it's not just Apple intentionally doing this. It's something that would accidentally and inevitably happen anyway, which means that the counterplan is pretty pointless. You're still going to need some level of repairs. Now, if they then argue that if phones can't last that long, then repairs aren't able to solve, so our plan isn't significant. But using a phone for 5 years compared to 1 year is pretty significant. If you're able to keep those repairs, obviously it's not going to last you forever, but if those repairs are able to last you at least some amount of time, it's going to mitigate a lot of the impacts we talk about. If we're able to cut down the amount of fires that happen by 4/5, that's pretty significant. Then we tell you that you are not going to be able to prove that companies are actually abandoning planned obsolescence. And they say that it's written into public release policies. Even if that were the case, when they pass their policy, they're just going to make these public release policies into things that happen in a covert manner, because companies are still going to wanting to be maximizing their profit. They're just going to continue creating subpar products, just not telling the public that they're creating subpar products, and there's really no way to verify whether or not they're creating subpar products or not. That counterplan can't solve. Okay, let's talk about briefly on our contentions. First, on the contention about the environment, there's a couple of critical impacts that I want you to extend, where we tell you about fires, 65% of which are caused in waste facilities are caused by the disposal of things like batteries that are combustible, as well as the fact that these landfills are oftentimes found in marginalized communities. Thus, it impacts local communities. They might try to tell you that the uniqueness overwhelms the link, but the uniqueness tells you that there are 500,000 phones being tossed away every single day in the United States. If we want to resolve those impacts, if we want to decrease the amount of things happening in landfills, obviously we need to take action against that. The uniqueness is really bad, and only the app plan has a significant way of solving. Moreover, I would argue that these impacts have to come first in today's debate because they're the cleanest battle on either side. We both have arguments when it comes to things like investor confidence. We both have arguments when it comes to things like the likelihood of cybersecurity breaches. But if anything, this is the most probable impact. Probability ought to come before magnitude, because there's no reason to evaluate high magnitude impacts if those impacts aren't going to happen. There's no reason to discuss something that isn't going to happen. Sure, it would be really bad if it did happen, but it's not going to happen is the point. And I'll get to that more later on. You can also extend our argument about the cost to the consumer, how we're able to save $4.3 billion within California alone, and hundreds of dollars to each individual family, thus increasing the accessibility of this technology. So let's talk about cybersecurity and their arguments more in depth. The first argument that I want you to extend right now is that this is non-unique. This is an argument that goes conceded out of the neg block, and thus you can extend to the end of the round. People already hack all the time. Russia is already attacking the United States cybersecurity, which indicates that these impacts are non-unique to the affirmation plan. Moreover, secondly, you can also extend this licensing argument. Releasing this information is not going to be sufficient for people to be able to hack into your technology entirely. This kind of proprietary knowledge doesn't give you anything extra. It's not things like the coding that goes into this technology. It's just the manuals and the parts and the instructions for how to repair the most common issues. It's not as though you're releasing your entire proprietary information. Next, on the Nokia example, they talk about releasing the code. Obviously, we're not asking people to release all the code that Nokia may have released. Obviously, if you leak diagnostic code or code for how your internet providing works, then obviously that's going to cause pretty negative impacts. You don't want to release all your code as for how your internet providing service works, and that's going to invite cyber attacks. But we're not asking companies to do that. Okay, next on their argument about investor confidence. Few responses. The first response is that Biden and the FTC and the Senate and the House and California has already announced similar laws that are likely going to go into place in the future, and there hasn't been a loss of investor confidence. Now, they said that the IP hasn't been shared yet, which is why there's no loss yet. But normally, investors anticipate. The entire role of an investor is to speculate about the future and to predict what's going to happen in the future. So the fact that the investors have not lost confidence, despite the fact that these have already been announced, indicates that they're not going to lose confidence when these policies actually go into place because they're already expecting them. But second, you can extend the fact that the counterplan links, which means there's no reason to evaluate any investor confidence impacts in this debate at all, because they're going to cause companies to sell less phones if they get rid of planned obsolescence. And if that's so effective as they themselves claim, then investor confidence is going to decrease because companies are able to sell less products because people don't need to replace their products so often because the products last longer, which indicates that they're going to hurt investor confidence also. Thirdly and finally, on the whole thing about individuals having the ability to fix their tools, individuals don't want to fix technology in an unsafe manner on their own. The only way to prevent them from having to do so, which is what they're doing in the status quo with examples like these tractors, is by making the information accessible so that they can actually reach a repair shop and be able to get their technology fixed for in a cheap manner. For these reasons, we're proud to affirm.
All right, thanks, folks. We'll write our ballots and then get back to you.